Hello, and welcome to another rushed, unscripted, badly produced and unfocused philosophy revision video. This one is on intuition and deduction because Emily has asked for that, so here goes. It's not a very easy topic, and I'm going to do the best I can. Let's just put it in context in terms of specification. So if you think about the 3 sections or 4 sections of specification, you've got what knowledge actually is, knowledge from the senses, theories of perception, knowledge from reason, and then the limits of knowledge. So what we're looking at here is the knowledge from reason section. And there's 3 ways that you can get knowledge from reason. There's innatism, which is Locke versus Leibniz and Plato. Then you've got the intuition and deduction section. And the intuition and deduction section is your Descartes versus Hume. But we need to be really careful about which bits of Hume we use to criticise Descartes, because some of it will be theory of ideas and some of it will be Hume's thought. So if we just start off with the difference between intuition and deduction. Both of them are a type of knowledge that comes without the senses, a priori knowledge, knowledge through reason. Intuition it's knowledge that is not worked out. We call it non-inferential. So I'm not starting from premises and working to a conclusion. I'm not saying da-da-da-da-da, therefore, it's just seen. It's just seen in a different way. It's just known. A small part of me has actually died while I did this. However, the best way I could think to illustrate this is a light bulb. I never thought I'd be, as a professional philosopher, holding a light bulb above my head to illustrate ideas. But there you go. So yeah, this idea that like, bing, I just see it and I sense it. It's not instinct. Please don't say it's instinct. And it's not a gut feeling. Deduction is where you do have an actual argument. So you're working from premises to a conclusion. At least 2 premises to a conclusion. And if your premises are correct, then that conclusion will be true. The conclusion is contained within those premises. So again, this is a priori, you don't need any extra experience. And if your premises are a priori, if your premises are known without the senses, then the whole thing is a priori. Now, when you do a deductive argument in the exam, you must present it in bullet points. So I don't want to see it in prose. So the 3 things that you need to know, you need to know the cogito for intuition, and you need to know Descartes on God and Descartes on the external world for deduction. So the cogito you present in prose, the argument for God and the argument for the external world, I want to see that in deduction in bullet points. So, if we start with the cogito is the result of the method of doubt. So if you do write on the cogito, don't start doing all the ways of doubt in depth, but just skip to the point where you've got the possibility of this evil demon who is deceiving us in all things. So Descartes has pushed out, this is an example of philosophical global doubt where it's used as a tool, pushed as far as you can possibly get it. Now, the only thing that stands up to that doubt is that he is thinking. So what he tries to do is he tries to deceive himself in all things. So he can deceive himself that there's no heaven, no earth, no sky, no bodies, no external world out there. But can he also deceive himself that he's not thinking? And he says, no, I'm persuaded I exist by the mere fact that I thought at all. I'm thinking, and this shows that I exist. But you've got to be careful that you don't say cogito ergo sum, that you don't say I think, therefore I am. That's an old version of it, which was actually, it looked like a deductive argument. What Descartes' doing here is he says ego sum, ego existo. I am, I exist. So here's a light bulb, bing. I'm embarrassed that I'm doing that. But it's not something that's worked out, it's just seen. It's an example of a clear and distinct idea. And clear and distinct ideas are really important for Descartes. That's your light bulb moment. These are ideas that are isolated and distinct from other ideas and that you cannot be wrong about. So this ego sum, ego existo is I am, I exist. And he says this is necessarily true every time I express it, every time I say it or conceive it, every time I think it. I don't need to argue it. I don't need to give you premises to a conclusion. It is just there, it's just seen. And if you don't see it, there's really no way of explaining it. So he's got this lovely phrase that I keep going on about, where he talks about the possibility of an evil demon, and it doesn't matter. So let him deceive me as much as he may, he can never cause me to be nothing, for so long as I think I am something. That's beautiful, that's really, really lovely. So what are we going to do about that? Because that's kind of powerful, and personally I love that and I don't want to get rid of it. But your man Hume, there's your Descartes, your man Hume is going to have something to say about that. Because as an empiricist, Hume cannot allow you to have significant knowledge, interesting knowledge, that has not come from the senses. So for Hume, all knowledge and all genuine ideas are from the senses, unless you're talking about empty analytic truths. Now, with Hume, you're going to use Hume's fork against deduction. But for the cogito argument, you're actually going to use Hume's theory of ideas. I don't know how well you can see this, so I'm going to have to zoom in a little bit. But Hume's theory of ideas is the idea that all ideas can be traced to earlier impressions, an impression being an experience. So even if you've got a complicated idea that you've never actually experienced in its entirety, like a golden mountain, he says, or a virtuous horse, you can break these down into simple ideas, golden mountain, and you have experienced them. Now, if you can't trace an idea to an impression, to an experience, then it's not a genuine idea, you're confused. And what Hume is going to say about self, about Descartes' cogito, where he's talking about I am, I exist, I have this self that endures, he's saying you don't have the idea of that. You have the idea of certain impressions. So I have the idea of thoughts and feelings and perceptions, and I might be hungry, I might be bored, I might be looking at a wall, but what you don't experience is the I to which all of these things are connected. So he says, I never catch myself without some perception. I never experience the me, the enduring self, the I that Descartes is so very proud of. And I tried to get you to do this in class, and just close your eyes and try and experience the self without any particular impression, without any particular thought or feeling, and you can't do it. So for Hume, the idea of self is an illusion, and the most that you can say is there's a bundle of perceptions. So what Descartes is telling you is you've got knowledge of self through intuition, through rational intuition. It is seen, and it's certain, and it's a priori. And Hume is saying, no, what you know is that there's a thought going on, and there's a thought going on, and there's a thought going on. Not that you can attach that to any substance, anything that is the you, is the I, is the self. So as much as it pains me to do it, he kind of rips that away from Descartes a little bit. So, moving on to deduction. There are, if you look at the textbooks, there are several arguments for God that Descartes gives, and I'm going to just focus on the ontological. Now, I haven't got a screen or anything to write this up, so you just need to perhaps pause and write this down. So the ontological argument for God is Descartes' argument for God that starts with just the concept of God, the idea. So if you think about where Descartes is in the Meditations when he does this, he's got his mind, but he hasn't got an external world, he hasn't got a universe, he can't go out and look at the beauty of the universe to prove God, he's just got to work with what's up here. So he starts with premise one, I have the clear and distinct idea of a supremely perfect being. Make sure you get that first one accurate, because people get tempted to say God is a supremely perfect being as the first premise. That's not the first premise, because that would be assuming what you're trying to prove. So what he does know is he has a clear and distinct idea of a supremely perfect being. That's up here, and that's undeniable. What you can add to that is that existence is a perfection. So second years who are watching this, you obviously need to unpack that idea with Kant. Is existence really perfection? First years, you don't really need to go into that this year. But the idea that existence is a perfection. Put that with premise 3. It is a logical contradiction to think of a supremely perfect being who lacks any particular perfection. So for Descartes, it's contradictory to think of a supremely perfect being who doesn't have existence. So he is not able to think of God without existing. So a supremely perfect being must also exist. So for Descartes, he works on those premises to the conclusion that God must necessarily exist. So for most things, the essence of what it is and its existence are separate questions. So I can talk about a unicorn and what makes a unicorn a unicorn. And without a horn, it's not a unicorn. That's the essence of a unicorn. But whether these things exist is a completely separate question. For Descartes, that's not the case with God. Once you understand the essence of God, you understand that he also exists. So make sure you've got those stages. I have a clear and distinct idea of supremely perfect being, existence is a perfection, it is a logical contradiction to think of supremely perfect being lacking some perfection, therefore God must actually exist. So, now would be a good time to introduce Hume's fork. Now Hume's fork, you could get asked on separately, but you also need to be able to apply it to Descartes' argument for God and the external world. I didn't know how to visualise this. I actually lost the plot and I've stuck a picture of Hume to an actual fork. So this actually has 3 prongs. So we're going to look at relations of ideas, matters of fact, and then if it falls in the middle, it's meaningless. If it's neither of those 2 things, it's meaningless. So I hope that this helps you in some way, because otherwise, I guess a small part of me is very sad that I've even done that. But let's have a look at the 2 prongs of Hume's fork. And again, I don't know how well you can see this, but it's the best I could do on that whiteboard. Relations of ideas and matters of fact. So these are the two ways that you can have knowledge that a proposition can be meaningful. Relations of ideas we now call analytic. They are true by definition, they are known a priori, and you can't deny them without contradiction. So if I was to say a bachelor is not an unmarried man, a triangle does not have three sides, then my words don't even make sense. That doesn't make sense. So to have that kind of necessity to them, then they have to be something you cannot deny that contradiction. Matters of fact we now call synthetic, and these are truths like the wall is white, the sky is blue. They're known through the senses, so they're a posteriori, and they can always be otherwise. So yeah, the sun has risen every day up until now, but it might not tomorrow. That's really important for causation, because Hume thinks that causation falls on this side. So whatever we know about cause so far might be different tomorrow. And I can deny these without contradiction. So Hume says, it's no less intelligible for me to say the sun will not rise tomorrow than to say that it will. I might be wrong, but my words actually make sense. It's not a logical contradiction. So if we take this and we apply this to what Descartes is trying to claim, Descartes is trying to claim that God has necessary existence, that his existence cannot be denied without contradiction. So he's trying to take existence and put it into the realm of relations of ideas. So on that side of Hume's fork. Now Hume said there is no such thing as necessary existence, because existence doesn't fall on the realms of relations of ideas, it falls on the side of matters of fact. So it can always be denied. Whatever can be conceived to exist can also be conceived not to exist. So I can conceive of God existing and not existing, and that is intelligible. So whereas Descartes tries to take God's existence and put it in the realm of things that can't be conceived otherwise, Hume says, no, that's not true. That's not how Hume's thought works. It falls on the idea of matters of fact. Whatever can be conceived of to exist can be conceived of not to exist also. So he applies Hume's fork to what Descartes is saying about God. So let's just leave that there then, and let's move on to Descartes' argument for the external world. Now, again, what he can't do is trust his senses to say, well, I'm experiencing a table, therefore a table has to exist. He can't do that. What he's going to do is apply certain principles. So Descartes thinks he knows, a priori, that all ideas have a cause. In fact, everything has a cause. So for him, this idea of everything has a cause, and the cause must have as much reality as its effect, is going to be very, very important here. So think about that, the idea that Descartes is going to tell you that he can know something about causation a priori, whereas Hume is going to tell you that you can know nothing about cause a priori. So what Descartes is going to do, again, is start with what's going on in his mind, start with what's in his thoughts. And he says, I have the involuntary perceptions of objects. So I'm having this idea of a table, and I can't choose it. Now, how can I use that idea to show that there's actually a world of objects out there? What I need to do is the process of elimination. And I'm going to do it by showing that it's got to have a cause. My idea of the table has a cause. It's not me, it's not God, so that only leaves a world of external objects out there. So we need to put this in some kind of deductive order, but let's just discuss that momentarily. First of all, if he was the cause of his ideas of objects, he'd be able to control them. He'd know he was the cause. So I'm having this idea of a table, I think I'll make it float. I can't do that. And equally, when I open my eyes, I can't choose not to perceive that table. Which it shows for Descartes that he himself is not the cause of his ideas of objects, or his perceptions that he's getting. So what about God? Could it be God who's giving him these ideas of objects that don't really exist? He's just having a laugh. There's no table there, but he's making it perceive a table. Now, for Descartes, it's very important to understand that he thinks God is perfect and deceit is an imperfection. So for him, the idea of a God who would deceive is a contradiction in terms. So if there is a God, and that God is perfect, he is not a deceiver. Which means that God is not going to give me the ideas of objects that don't exist just for a laugh. He's not going to do that. And he always gives me a way to correct my mistakes. If I'm really thinking about it, I'm really trying, and I'm not just blindly believing things, he's going to give me a way to sort out any erroneous beliefs. And yet, try as I might, I'm still having this idea that there's a table there, I've still got this strong inclination that there's a world of objects out there. So God's not going to do that to me, because he's not like that, he's not a deceiver. So if I start from the beginning then, I have the involuntary perceptions of objects. Secondly, all ideas have a cause, and that cause must be at least as great as the effect. So the cause of my ideas of objects has to be at least as great as the ideas of objects themselves. It's not me. I'm not the cause of my ideas of objects. because they come to me against my will, I cannot control them. God is not the cause of my ideas of objects, because that would make him a deceiver, and God is not a deceiver. So that leaves objects themselves, external world of objects, causing my ideas of those objects. And for that, Descartes believes that the external world exists. Now, you can also use that argument when you're talking about the limits of knowledge and all this scepticism about the existence of the external world. Descartes' argument for the external world fits in there as well. So, what's Hume and his fork going to say about that? Again, you've got to look at whether the existence of the external world falls on either prong. Is it a relation of ideas? Is it something I can know that's true by definition? Well, no, the external world exists is not true by definition. There's nothing in the phrase the external world that contains its existence. Is it a matter of fact? Is it something I can get from the senses? Well, no, because he falls into the realm of indirect realism. I can have the experiences, but I cannot experience anything beyond those experiences. I cannot experience the cause. So I can't know that there's an external world causing my ideas of objects. I cannot know that. It's not something I can reach through reason. It's not something I can reach through the senses. So therefore it's not going to be any kind of knowledge, because it's not a relation of ideas and it's not a matter of fact. In addition to that, he takes issue with Descartes' idea that you can know anything about causation a priori. So whereas Descartes says, I just know that all ideas have a cause and I can know this a priori, Hume says, no, you can't. Causation falls into the realm of matters of fact, and because of that, it can be otherwise. So it is always possible, it's logically possible, however strange that might seem, that your ideas of objects don't have any cause at all. It's possible that they've just appeared, and therefore you can't use those ideas of objects to get to the external world. So where are we going with all of this? What's the whole thing? You've got three arguments from Descartes. One is intuition, which is the cogito. Two are deduction, God and the external world. And I just want you to focus on the ontological argument for God. Forget cosmological, forget trademark, let's just hone in on the ontological. Hume uses his theory of ideas to show that the cogito doesn't work because you have no genuine idea of self. He uses Hume's fork, one last time for Hume's fork, to show that the deductive arguments for God and the external world do not work. If you were to get an essay on this, not on innatism, they'll separate that off as a separate essay, but on intuition and deduction, you've really got to question whether there can be any significant knowledge without the senses. It's probably going to be easier to argue that no, there's not, and that Hume's theory of ideas and Hume's fork actually destroy Descartes' arguments, however much I generally love Descartes. So I hope that helps. You might need to read that or watch that a couple of times and zoom in a little bit to read these bits, but hopefully it will help you grasp that a little bit. Keep your suggestions coming. Thank you.